Welcome everyone to the Elmwood School Project Community Information Session regarding the Elmwood School Project. We appreciate your attendance both in person and virtually. This is our 11th community forum and will be the most comprehensive, as this evening's presentation will bring you up to speed about information starting at the beginning of the project to now. Prior to next week's town meeting on Monday, November 13th, and the town ballot on November 28th. For those of you who are viewing our session online, we ask this evening that you use the Zoom Q&A function in the online forum so that you can ask your questions. We have about a 45-minute presentation or so, and at the end we'll be answering the questions you've submitted online, and we will also provide an opportunity for those of you who are in person to come to the microphone, state your name, and share your question in person as well. So over the last year and a half, we spent ample time understanding the challenges facing Elmwood and the Hopkinton school system. As a committee, we have analyzed many design options, site selections, and have worked to develop the solution that the committee unanimously believes is the best option to solve educational needs in the most cost-effective way for our town. Again, this is our 11th community forum, and we held so many community forums because we have a deep commitment to be sure that we are gaining the insight of the Hopkinton community, your input, your questions, and provide us with an opportunity to give you the answers and why we feel like this is the best fit. In the project timeline that you can see here, a couple of places that we wanted to be sure that you noted were big decisions for us along the way was, of course, our OPM selection, which is the Vertex Project Management Group, our designer selection, which is Perkins Eastman, and we have representatives from both of those constituents this evening. You'll note that these are the community forums we had along the way, those little green asterisks. And you'll also note that the start of construction should be happening should this pass at the town meeting and the ballot vote in the near future, and would help the schools to have a new school slated to open in January of 2028. Next slide, please. Also in the process, we began really by going to our community. We believe that strong schools help to create strong communities, and Hopkinton has shown this time and time again. And we knew in order for this project to meet our community's needs, we first needed to gain experts and opinions from our community constituents. We began by hosting a visioning team that held about 40 individuals that helped us to align the educational vision and goals for this building and the design. We also held sessions with Hopkinton educators to learn more about their educational visioning and needs. We had meetings with the school committee regarding grade configuration and how we could best support the enrollment, not only for the Elmwood School, but also other schools within the Hopkinton Public School System. And then the school committee charged us with a new grade configuration as the preferred option to move forward with, and that's how the designs were built. So through sessions with the Elmwood staff and teachers, the Hopkins staff and teachers, the Hopkinton Public School administrators, the visioning team, we were able to define and identify the priority needs for our educational needs here in Hopkinton for our students and for a new school building. A vast majority of the educational needs are reimbursable by the MSBA and have been approved by the MSBA for reimbursement. So these priorities are designed to meet the needs, nothing more and nothing less. And the idea is that this new school will be an investment for 50 years that should support the enrollment of our growing community. So I'll pass it off to, I believe,
Bob for the.
Bob.
Thank you. we're looking at here is just a projection of the enrollment, up at the top of the screen. We can see the grade levels, pre-K all the way through 12. And on the left-hand side, it ticks through the years, starting with fiscal year 2023 at the top and all the way down to 2032. What's important that you can see here is just that, as we look at the color coding, green, yellow, and red, green, it means that you are at your capacity, even 10% above your capacity. So even in green, you're starting to see that classes are getting slightly larger. Yellow represents enrollments that are now starting to push more than 2 students per classroom, and or the need to start to repurpose other rooms to create more classrooms. And red is in the area where you really need to have built more classrooms. You can't just handle the increases with the next slide shows reconfiguration, the proposed configuration of the Elmwood School at grade 2 through 4. And what's really important here is you can see not only does the Elmwood School meet the needs for 3 grade levels, but because of that and because of the shift in grade, it also alleviates the need at the middle school. So for the growing numbers and growing population that's defining now, this is a way to really prudently, with MSBA reimbursement, handle the most amount of the way of money. As far as where we've been, we really had a search far and wide.
I'll take this back. Thank you. Mike Shepherd. Thank you all for coming. Initially, early on, the architect and the team wanted to find out what we had for vacant land in town might be available for schools. I reached out to the town assessor. He gave me a list of almost 50 properties, it was 7 acres and more, and had nothing else on it. And it listed everything from, there was a 15-acre property off of College Rock. Some of these properties we found to be too steep. College Rock was one of them, obviously. We had another property that was pretty high up on the list down at Western Nurseries, but again, the slopes were such that it was going to cost a fortune to build a school. That and the lady that owned it, so we looked at potential options up on South Street. 52 was for sale at the time. The problem with that one was that it had no playfields. There was no place to put any playfields. The size of the lot was too small. The building was built, but of course it was not built as a school, so it was going to have a considerable amount of work. And we were not going to get any reimbursement for that work from the MSBA. So then if you go to the next slide, we narrowed it down to about 14 options. And we did it kind of like what's the best one? Green being best, red being not so good. We broke it down to like 15 different categories. The most interesting one you see about halfway down is traffic. And all the Elmwood school site down to the left was just above Gore. And you can see if we added land to the Elmwood site, which ultimately wasn't available, it got a little bit better. But all the rest are just above Gore as well, including the Hagenbrook. We knew that going in. And at that time, before we made the selection, we hired an engineer, a traffic engineer that specialized in this stuff. So we narrowed it down to more green, the various schemes had, the better it was. And that's how we ended up with the Hayden Grocery site. The land was already owned by the town. It was obviously big enough, and we hoped that would work out. So that's what into it. We looked at a lot of land, a lot of sites, and it turns out that the site up near Marathon was the best one. Okay.
Bob, before you jump into the site plan, I did want to note for those who are on the Zoom tonight, following this presentation, we'll have an extensive Q&A opportunity. If you're on the Zoom and you have a question that you don't want to lose sight of, feel free to drop it in the chat. That's where we'll be collecting the questions that come through on the Zoom during the Q&A, but you can put it in at any time and we will address it when we get to the Q&A portion.
So as Mike had mentioned, this is the selected site. On the left-hand side of the screen is Hayden Row. To the top of the screen, you can see the Marathon School. And as Mike had mentioned, this was selected being town-owned. It provided ample land to fit the program, but it also provided the opportunity to mitigate the traffic, to have a campus connection to the Marathon School and pull cars off the street basically more than what is expected to be with the full queue, as well as buses, and then you can manage the traffic that way. Next one. We zoom in just a little bit closer. You can see, look at the plan. Parking is situated with the bus loop in the front of the school. Cars would circulate along the rotary and then around the back of the proposed school. During the school day, that roadway around the back would be closed off. It would be gated, so it becomes part of the play and allows the students to have direct connection to the play fields and the recess. Next slide. Overall, the plan is 3-story, 3 wings. That's very deliberate so that the grades can be organized either by floor or by wing or some combination thereof. The wings are short on purpose because one of the primary points of the vision was to create a small school field, small school environment. What you're looking at for each one of those wings with the blue and the purple are small learning neighborhoods. All of the classrooms huddle around the common shared breakout space, while the main portion of the school where you see all the yellow and some of the red, those are the community use areas like the gym, cafeteria, the media center. And at the core of the media center are arts and tech spaces as well, which is another important part of the vision. The school is designed to be safe and secure and welcoming. So each one of these wings can close off, but the administration has good control of the division, not only who enters the building, but inside the building and also out in the park. It's flexible and adaptable in many different ways. The dotted lines that you see on this plan show the potential for expansion. So there's forward thinking, should the enrollments go beyond what's even projected. But there's also capacity within the number and count of rooms that are designed. Just ticking through a few more of the floor levels. The media center is at the heart. It's connected to new science, technology, and engineering spaces, which help meet the curriculum and the needs for modern learning. It's also become a requirement in schools. And then the next floor up shows you a continuation of those same spaces with arts, science, and technology as well. It's also designed to be very efficient, one of the most efficient schools designed, elementary schools designed within the state, and for good solar orientation, so that it would be both energy efficient as well as spatially efficient. The materials selected for the building and the massing of the building were also designed to scale the approach to the school. So you see 1-story at the very entrance of the school with some flanked by some 2-story and 3-story academic wings that are in the back. All the materials are durable. We looked at all of the materials that were selected for the project for the scope were vetted for maintenance, life cycle cost, durability. And so it's a pretty solid school, built economical, but built fast. The HVAC system was selected. The HVAC system was selected based on looking at a typical 175,000 square foot building and using that metric to compare 4 different systems. The 4 different systems range from a full ground source heat pump, which would have geothermal wells heating the building, an electric VRF system, which would still be fully electrified, but is not as efficient as the ground source heat pump. Hybrid options of mixed wells, as well as an air exchange heat pump, and a more traditional natural gas boiler, chiller, and variable air volume system. The engineers looked at life cycle costs, so they looked at what the initial cost would be to buy the equipment. They also looked at incentives that would be available from mass save based on a program that the
that is already stipulated that the schools entered into. And they looked at the ongoing energy costs, well, replacement costs 15 to 20 years down the line. The outcome of that analysis showed that with the incentives offered by the state, as well as the increase in efficiency and the fewer replacement components, the ground source heat pump system was actually the cheapest over a 30-year lifespan. What that means is that the school will have a system that is able to provide both heating and cooling, where in the summer, it will pull heat from the air and return it to the ground, whereas in the winter, it will pull heat from the ground and place it into the air through use of compressors similar to how the refrigerator works.
So in choosing the Hayden Row site, as Mike mentioned earlier, one of the critical components that we recognized is the need to assess the traffic impact that would be happening along the Hayden Row corridor. We moved up in the process the initial traffic study and assessment so that we could make sure that we stayed as far ahead of the challenges around traffic as possible. So our consultant put together a very detailed traffic report and highlighted some of the key challenges that exist on Hayden Row right now as it relates to school traffic. One of them is the volume of cars that are turning left throughout the morning drop off and afternoon pickup. And specifically around that site, the left turn lane at Marathon School is inadequate. It wasn't designed for the volume of cars that are currently going into that school. And we need to accommodate not only that, but future vehicle queuing if we're going to add a school to it. Our estimates think that somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 100 cars will be driving to the new school in that location. Currently, so the new school will need another vehicular access to the new building as well. And in the current conditions, the buses are traveling across town from Marathon and Hopkins all the way over to the Elmwood School, causing additional left turns to be made by those buses. And we don't have enough traffic breaks between Grove Street and Chestnut Street along that pathway to manage the traffic. And finally, we need to make sure that pedestrians would have access to the new site. The engineer made several recommendations, which include a lengthening of the turn lane at the Marathon entrance, potential installation of a traffic signal at the Marathon entrance, not only a new entrance at 147 Hayden Row, but a left turn lane to accommodate that as well as some high visibility crosswalks, signalized crosswalks, so that pedestrians could walk to school as safely as possible. When it comes to the site design, in particular, the design and location choice really is going to help us not only mitigate the traffic impact, but potentially improve some of the overflow that's happening at Marathon right now. It allows more buses to queue onto the site. And also, because they don't have to travel across town to Elmwood, it allows for fewer bus runs throughout the town. So those who live especially in the neighborhoods, might notice during the elementary run, there are a lot of kids at bus stops, and the first bus comes and picks up about half of them. And then the rest of them wait for a second bus at the exact same stop 5 minutes later. And that's because there are separate buses going to Marathon and Elmwood. This would consolidate those and reduce our bus runs by up to 12, which could be used to shorten the current bus ride times for students, and could also be used to just reduce the number of buses that are out on the road, also allowing for an operational cost savings. The proposed site will allow for the queuing of 140 cars. So based on the cars that are projected to be driving to Elmwood, this would actually be in excess of the number of cars. So they would also be able to pick up some of the additional traffic coming into Marathon, which is important because once the left turns happen, those cars need to be able to get off of Hayden Row to clear the road so that we don't have traffic backups as a result of it. We would also have the connection between the Marathon site and the Elmwood site, which would allow parents dropping off at both schools to easily drop off or pick up at both schools without leaving the site, reducing the number of turns that would occur on Hayden Row. And finally, it would allow better staff cooperation because teaching specialists at the elementary level could easily move back and forth between the two schools and not have to go all the way across town between Marathon and Elmwood to provide services to students. So all in all, we think that the site design in particular is going to be a significant benefit to the traffic as it's occurring on Hayden Row right now. The roadway improvements, turn lanes, traffic signal, et cetera, that I mentioned previously, will all be analyzed as part of the design and construction process. We'll have to work with the planning board to determine what are the best solutions for all of those. But at the moment, what we have done is we have put all of the roadway improvement money into the budget so that if we do go forward with everything, the money is already in the budget, but that's not to say that we will necessarily go forward with all of those proposed changes.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the educational programming. The educational programming document is probably about 45 pages long, and it's something that we began writing well over a year ago. And so, there we go, that's much better. Thank you. And so when you put together your educational plan, what you're essentially doing is you're saying these are the things that are academically and educationally and socially and emotionally and behaviorally important to the town of Hopkinton in the way we deliver services and instruction. And so once we have that together, then our design team starts to work on a school that will help us to deliver those programs and that instruction in maximal ways. So one of the first things that we did was we took a look at what it would mean to have a 1,200 student elementary school. And we thought, how can we make this have a nice small neighborhood school feel for students who are second, third, and fourth graders? And so that was designed. We purposefully designed those neighborhoods so that kids will come into the Elmwood School and have this neighborhood feel to live in and to work in and to learn in over the 3 years that they stay at the new Elmwood School. One of the other things that we underscored is important to us is science instruction. And so we will have 3 science, technology, and engineering rooms along with a makerspace. I don't know how carefully people are following sort of the evolution of science instruction in Massachusetts, but somewhere around 2016, we got new standards, and those standards emphasize practices, which means that now students, when they are learning science, they're not just learning content, but they are doing science. And in the next iteration of the MCAS test, that doing or those practices are actually going to be assessed on the test. So you can see that the structure that we're building here is designed to address science instruction as it evolves in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but also as it evolves in terms of its thinking and preparing kids for the next 50 years or the next century in terms of learning. Oops, one back. There we go. Special education services were also considered. And when we take a look at those wings, you're going to see that they are color coded very purposefully so that general education classrooms are in light blue. And on the end, you're going to see purple classrooms, and those are designed for special education. When we start to talk about breakout spaces, you'll see how our kids are going to sort of intermingle, whether you're a general education student, an ESOL student, a special education student, you'll live in that wing as really a small school community. So let's talk a little bit about those breakout spaces. When you see the next picture, you're going to see that in those shorter hallways that Bob was describing earlier, there's actually a large space in the center, and those are the breakout areas. Those can be used for instructional enhancement. They can be used for remediation. They can be used for collaborative learning projects. And so because kids will be coming and going and working on multiple things out there, it won't simply be a space for special education students or ESOL students. And so our kids will really be able to come into those spaces with teachers, with specialists, with related services providers, and roll up their sleeves and learn together as a community. In terms of the media center, we are a district that prides itself on our literacy instruction, and we very often talk about multiple literacies. We want kids to be able to engage in reading things like pie charts or bar graphs. We want them to be financially literate. So there are so many different literacies that we underscore now, and they are part of the Massachusetts state frameworks. So when we think about that media center, that is a place where teachers can bring their kids, they can engage in inquiry learning, meaning making, creative processes, and that will happen across all of the disciplines. It's an incredible two-story space, and part of it can be used as a traditional library space, and other parts of it can be used for kids to engage in different and more innovative kinds of learning. And then finally, ESOL. I say it all the time, but when I first came to Hopkinton, we had about 48 English learners in our school district, and today we have about 248 English learners, and many students who are defined as FELs or former English learners. And so we have put in spaces that will fold our ESOL students right into the fabric of the community. So just very quickly to review, you can see the design there. You can see our two-story media center. You can take a look at those breakout spaces. And one of the reasons that we thought they were so fantastic is that we've got a chance as a team to go and visit other brand new elementary schools in the state of Massachusetts. And when we went into schools that had those breakout spaces and we watched teaching and learning happening in those spaces, we thought that that would be very right for Hopkinton. You'll be able to see the purple special education spaces, rooms at the ends of those hallways, the science instructional spaces, and then, of course, the neighborhoods. Finally, this slide takes you right inside a classroom. So if you look at the aerial view, you can see how the light is going to come into the classroom and still allowed for there to be whiteboards on all 4 walls. A traditional classroom back in the day may have had kids sitting in rows facing a singular chalkboard. With whiteboards in 4 spaces, you can have 4 different learning stations to make sure that you're differentiating instruction to meet the needs of where kids are in that classroom, to give them exactly what it is that those children need. On the right-hand side, you can see it sort of looking into the front wall, and you can see what kids are doing. They're just working at tables on individual tasks. You can see that there is a teacher down there working one-on-one with the student, and that's really the way we deliver instruction right now in 2023 in our schools. Finally, when we send our kids off from the new Elmwood School, we want to make sure that they are very well socially and emotionally adjusted, that they are behaviorally sound. And so when we take a look at the personnel that we're going to need as we move into the new building, you saw that there are 3 wings. We want to ensure that we have an assistant principal for each one of those wings. So when kids come into that school, and if there is a grade of 400 students, I know 400 students sounds like a lot, and it is a lot for a single assistant principal. There are many schools, elementary schools, that have a lower ratio than that. But we would have an assistant principal for 400 students, and they would stay with that assistant principal from the time they entered the Elmwood School until they left. The beauty of that is that our assistant principal gets to know the children, make connections with families, and when you start to have that kind of wraparound service, our kids benefit from it. The same thing with adjustment counselors. We would have 3 of those, 1 for each wing, and again, they would service the same children over a 3-year period. And then finally, family outreach is a critical part of what we do, especially at the elementary level. And so with the collaboration between assistant principals, teachers, counselors, families, and students, we're really going to maximize the opportunities for kids to reach their fullest potential at the new Elmwood School.
A question that we've been getting a lot over the past month, so we decided to put it into the presentation, is an analysis of what happens if this project does not pass at town meeting or at the town ballot. Obviously, sort of the easy thing to say is if the project doesn't pass, we don't build the building. And that is effectively what would happen. The project would cease to exist. We would no longer be in the MSBA pipeline. And if we wanted to do something to renovate or replace the Elmwood School in the future through the MSBA, we would need to reapply into their process and then do all of the modules of site selection, design, feasibility that we have done over the last couple of years over again. But that's only from a project perspective. So what would actually happen from a town of Hopkinton and school district perspective if the project doesn't go forward? We did some illustration based on enrollment projections to show what the impact would be on the facilities at the Elmwood School and the middle school. Because in making this a second, third, and fourth grade school, one of the things this is doing is not just relieving the constraints at the Elmwood Elementary School, but also all the schools that are facing overcrowding. And in particular, it's the middle school that feels the biggest crunch right now. One note on these is we use the MSBA enrollment projections, which are the same enrollment projections that were used to determine the size of the building we were going to build. A couple of people have asked questions about those enrollment projections, and the reality is, as anyone who's followed the Hopkinton School District over the last probably 15 years knows, enrollment projections are a really difficult thing to land on. We never really seem to come in at where those projections actually say we're going to land. There are projections from another demographer that are slightly lower than these projections. Again, we're using the MSBA ones for consistency's sake, and it's worth noting that we actually already have more students in the district today than the projections have us scheduled to have by the end of this school year. So we continue to be pacing ahead of those projections, but I just thought it was helpful context. What this shows is how we're tracking in those buildings to get to that yellow and red that Bob was showing earlier, and what would actually impact that. So you can see, it's a little bit of an eye chart, and I have a summary on the next slide. You can see that the class sizes continue to grow, and you start to get average class sizes in the 25, 27 range at the elementary level. And you also start to see that those lunch shifts go up because the cafeteria only has so much capacity to serve students on a given lunch shift. So you could end up with situations where there are 5, or in the case of the middle school, 6, 7, or 8 lunches. And if you think about the length of a lunch shift, those can end up being very early or very late in the day. So we can go ahead to the next slide. In terms of mitigating what would happen with those increases in size, one option would be to add modular classrooms. We could add modular classrooms at the Elmwood School, but there is a cost to that, obviously, to bring those classrooms in. It also doesn't mitigate the needs of hallways, toilets, nurse's office, administration, gym, and lunchrooms, which would all need to be addressed, or we would have those much larger sections that we were talking about. The alternative is that the community could accept those larger class sizes, which are outlined on here. Again, 28 students per classroom at Elmwood as early as 2029. Our current targets, just for people's context, for elementary school, average class size for Hopkinton is targeted to be in the low 20s. So that's a really significant jump that we'd be facing. And you'd have larger classes in PE as well, which would be more difficult for the teachers to manage and would probably require additional staff to manage those classrooms. Go ahead to the next one. So what does that really come down to? If there were no classroom expansion, we had no modulars that were brought in. Elmwood code upgrades, which is just bringing the building up to code, would cost somewhere between $30 and $43 million, including HVAC updates and $40 million additional to relocate the students while those code upgrades were being taken care of, because the students couldn't be in the building while that was going on, and the summer is not a long enough time to close the school to do those code upgrades. A question I got after the last forum is, what is the requirement of a code upgrade? We don't have to do a code upgrade tomorrow if the project fails. It's not a requirement, but obviously it shows the fact that we would need that significant code upgrade shows the deficiencies in the building. The real problem is we would be triggered by the building code to do a code upgrade if something happened, if there was a repair needed at the building of a sufficient size. So if part of the heating system went out and needed to be repaired, that could usually just be done. If we had a more significant failure above a certain cost, it triggers the full code upgrade, which means if we continue on in Elmwood School in the long term, this is sort of hanging over our heads, that if something significant enough goes wrong, this would be required by building code. Again, the community would have to accept those larger class sizes. If we were to address the space with modular classrooms, we'd still have the code upgrade that we discussed before. We'd be looking at 16 modular classrooms by 2028, which would cost us somewhere between $22 and $24 million, and another 22 additional modular classrooms costing around $30 million by 2032. So you can see in total, if we don't do the modulars, you're looking at potentially $83 million in code upgrades. And if we do the modulars, you're looking at anywhere between $110 and $138 million in cost that would need to be incurred. Also worth noting, none of this comes with any MSBA reimbursement, so any of these costs would be entirely borne by the town. Okay, and now I think we're going to talk about costs, so we're going to activate Bill on the Zoom.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Well,
better.
I also want to thank everyone for attending both online and in person. Yeah, your engagement's very much appreciated, and it's very important as well. During our last community forum on October 24th, I shared that our baseline reimbursement rate from the MSBA was 43.42%. However, the very next day, we received news that at their October board meeting, the MSBA raised their cost caps, increasing the reimbursement by 31.5%. So when we calculated all the benefits of this exciting news, including the incentive points for energy efficiency and incentive points for how we've maintained our buildings, at the bottom of the page, you'll see that our new maximum potential reimbursement is now $61,527,604, which is a substantial increase of almost $15 million. That's certainly great news. However, let's take a step back to see how this all unfolded. You may remember our last meeting, we talked about how back in March of 2023, we did our initial construction cost estimate. It came out at a little over $135 million. Well, over the next several weeks, through several meetings, we made some decisions regarding our external and internal materials, what type of construction manager we would hire, and many other decisions. And we were able to reduce that initial construction budget by almost $10 million. Then we took a deep dive into some construction alternatives, and some of them would have increased the cost, others would have decreased. We ended up settling on 3 of them for an additional savings of over $665,000. So all told, the revised construction estimate went from $135 million down to $124 million for a savings of a little bit more than $10 million. And it brought our construction cost per square foot down to $714 per square foot. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about Marathon, and as we remember, Marathon came in under budget and under time. But the question I'm hearing is, why is the Elmwood replacement so much more expensive? Well, if you use the construction budget of the Marathon School, which was $35 million, and you factor in the 3 times larger enrollment that we're facing with Elmwood, and add in the 36% construction inflation, which unfortunately is the world we live in, you can see that rounds up to over $143 million. Well, let's look at some of the ways we're able to find those cost savings. The next page shows you that on the left, you'll see where we were back in March. In the middle is where we are today, and all the way to the right shows you the differential. So you can see in the top line, we were able to, through some design engineering, save about 1,100 square feet in our latest estimate. Line number 2 shows that the cost estimate, as I mentioned earlier, is down roughly 10 million because some of the decisions we made as a committee. The soft cost multiplier, now that's the money you need for things like furniture and fixtures and technology and computers. Originally, we had factored in 28.8%. We now believe 26.8 will take care of that for another reduction of 2%. The next line puts a dollar amount to that percentage. It's a savings of an additional $5.4 million. So the total budget project, which was 174 back in March, is now down to $158,422,394. That's a reduction of over $15.5 million. And based on the news I shared a few moments ago, our potential maximum reimbursement has now gone up substantially for an additional $16.6 million. Now, let's take a closer look at how we compare to other schools. Now, this slide is a little busy, but what you'll see is it shows all of the schools that the MSBA has partnered with since 2008, 2009. In the middle of the page, near the bottom, you'll see the Marathon School, and it's slightly below the trend line for all schools, and it was priced and built back in 2017, 2018 at around $350 a square foot. To the right, you will see that Elmwood is significantly higher at $714 per square foot. However, it is the lowest cost per square foot of all projects currently under consideration with the MSBA today. As a matter of fact, you look at the top middle of the page, you'll see the schools of Scituate, Stoughton, and Dedham. All three of those towns are working on projects now that are between $850 and $900 per square foot. So now let's take a look at a couple of more comparisons of where we were able to save some money in the design of Elmwood. On the left, you have the Marathon information. On the right is Elmwood. Marathon was built initially for 395 students. Elmwood is being projected for 1,195, which simple math says it's 3 times larger in enrollment. The gross square foot per student for Marathon came in at 211 square feet, whereas Elmwood is significantly less. So this is one of the areas we're able to save some money through space-saving design. So kudos to the design team for helping us to achieve that goal. We are actually 30.8% more efficient with the design of this new school than we were back with Marathon. And we are the top 5 most efficient MSBA new construction elementary school in the past 11 years. At the bottom, you'll see that the cost per student served is just over $104,000. That brings us into the lowest 1/3 of all MSBA elementary school projects since January 1st of 2020, and that does not include inflation. So although we have designed an extremely cost-efficient school with the lowest square foot cost of all schools being projected in 2023, we did so without compromising the quality or style of the building, and maybe more importantly, without compromising the educational needs of the students. And finally, let's recap where we are today. The total budget project is $158,422,394. When you factor in the estimated rebates from Mass Save of $1.7 million, the expected rebate from the IRA program at $4 million, and the new revised reimbursement rate of $61.5 million, it leaves the town contribution at a net $91.195 million estimate. Now, even with the rebates and the reimbursements, we can appreciate this as a significant investment. And the question we get literally daily is, what does that mean to me? Well, let's look at the median tax impact. If you're a homeowner in Massachusetts, in Hopkinton today, not sure what just happened, my screen went blank. So hopefully you guys still have a screen in front of you, but
we do.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened here, but I got kicked off of Zoom. But I'm on the last slide. So the average home in Hopkinton today is $753,000. And if you happen to own that home, your tax liability last year was $11,910. Obviously, if this program gets approved, we will borrow the money. The majority of the money will be borrowed over the next 3 to 4 years. So in the first 3 or 4 years, your taxes will go up gradually. But in the year 2028, we estimate that will be the peak year, and your taxes will go up $952. Again, an estimate. So based on taxes currently of $11,910, an increase of $952 equates to about 8% increase in tax if this is approved. And after 2028, the tax levels start to come down. By 2040, it's $726. By 2050, it's $538, and so on, until it's paid off in 30 years. It's also important to note that the $91 million net number to Hopkinton includes a $10.1 million contingency that provides us a good cushion from any unexpected costs, again, if approved. With that, I'll turn it back to Chris.
Thanks, Bill. So as in sort of closing, we wanted to touch on some of the major decisions that were made. Certainly, we highlighted how the grade configuration and the inclusion of the 4th grade solves problems at both Elmwood and the middle school, which allows the town to save money versus having to upgrade those, as John showed in his slides. The selection of a geothermal heating system is going to have long-term benefits and lower operating costs overall versus conventional systems. We selected using a design bid build approach rather than a construction manager because we feel that the requirements of the building can be determined in advance, and so that's going to provide a significant cost savings versus signing on a CM to do the project. Material selections were discussed at length at multiple ESBC meetings to ensure that we had something that was both cost-effective, aesthetic, but would also have the longevity and maintenance friendly approach so that it could be maintained over time at a lower cost. Ultimately, we looked at ways to reduce the gross building area and the ineligible spaces, which means that both that you're building only the space that you need and that the most space is supported by the MSBA's program. When we look at where we are now, we've really looked at the original PDP where we looked at what is in the building, things like what should the educational program for the building be. We looked at where the building should go in the PSR phase that concluded in February. And really what this last phase, the schematic design phase, has done is looked at how much should the building cost. That's really where we've been focused. Ultimately, we want to establish a budget the town can support that will allow the ESBC to have the money it needs to complete the project. But that doesn't mean that we're done. We still have a design development phase where the architect will look at the details of the building that they're preparing for the community and develop those. And we'll have a construction documents phase where they'll document all of those decisions that are made in DD so that they can be built by the contractor. Saddling those two phases will be a project approval process. And during that time, we're going to look at what do we do with the, what are the choices that we need to make to move through the town approval process, the planning board, the DPW, other town entities, Conservation Commission. And that's really where we're going to take the developed design and ensure that it meets the needs of the community and will work with the community. A big part of that will be revisiting traffic and ensuring that the final traffic decisions that are made, which are budgeted for from the schematic design phase, will work for the community as part of a public meeting process.
Okay, before we get to the Q&A portion, not remotely the last time I'm going to say this, but reminder that town meeting is this Monday, November 13th at 7 p.m. In the middle school auditorium with overflow into the Brown Gym. And then the town ballot for this article will also be on November 28th, all day under normal voting hours. We're going to go to the Q&A portion now. For those who are in the room, remedying a mistake I made at the last forum, I will ask people to come to the microphone so that those on the Zoom and watching on HCAM can clearly hear the question. We have received a number of questions both ahead of the meeting and virtually over the Zoom chat. So I'll answer a couple of those, and if people have questions and want to come to the mic, I'll recognize people who are at the mic. The first one is a question that came in advance about the roadway improvements, specifically the traffic light, asking what the intent of the traffic light is at Marathon School, specifically around how it's going to be run. Is it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? And the answer is we haven't reviewed or established a plan for the operation of any traffic light if it ends up being part of the final traffic plan. We'll need to work with the planning board and do further traffic analysis to determine the operation of the light. The intent at this point is, in the process, is to ensure that, again, there's sufficient budget for any roadway improvements that might be included, but we haven't gotten to the detail level of exactly what that light will do. And then one more question that works off of that is, as an alternative to a traffic light, could the traffic control be performed by a dedicated police officer during high travel times? This is something that will be, again, discussed as part of the process that will be ongoing with the town manager's office, with the planning board, with the HPD, before a final decision is made. I will just note that the challenge with this option is if we do rely on a police officer crossing guard, it would be if there are times when that person can't be there, whether it's an emergency, understaffing, or absence, we would just have no traffic control. So that's a risk point of that option. But it is something that will be explored. And then just wrapping the traffic light questions in this submission, asking about an additional traffic light at Chamberlain. There is no traffic light being considered or proposed at Chamberlain. There's no traffic light being considered beyond the one at Marathon. But we do plan either way to look at painting lines at that intersection in Chamberlain that was suggested by a resident. Those don't block the box lines to prevent people from pulling through and allow, when there are backups, people to more easily get in and out. Any questions in the room or?
Dave Turner, one of the questions I have, guys keep saying that this will save enrollment space and so forth. Yet, when I look at the enrollment for Hopkins, right, 4 or 5 in the year that this would go down, using the NCA numbers, is 860. And if we do 5-6, so do 5-6, you get 869. So that means about 31 people per class. How are we, is that something we want to do? Is there additional costs that we're going to have to do to try and fix the over-enrollment at Hopkins? That's, because we keep saying this is going to save us money. It's going to save us money upstream. And I don't see it because I see we're just cramming the same amount of people, more people, really, students, into Hopkins without doing it.
That is correct. So the Elmwood project, at the Maytown meeting, there will also be an addition request for the Hopkins School. No matter what we do, whether we do anything with Elmwood or not, we will also need to address Hopkins School because of that enrollment. The Elmwood, where that does save with upstream projects, really is at the middle school because we get to pull a grade out of the middle school. So if Elmwood becomes a 2, 3, 4, Hopkins becomes 5, 6, now the middle school is only a 7, 8, and that grade pull out of the middle school gives us the space capacity for middle school and high school.
But if we don't do anything at Hopkins, say it doesn't pass, because if I'm not mistaken, that's about 42 to 50 million.
So either way, Hopkins needs to be addressed as well.
But it could fail.
And Hopkins could fail as well. This This is all part of, a few years ago, we were charged with doing a full district plan to see where we are with all of our facilities and the growing enrollment. And this is what came out in terms of trying to plan for the future, trying to plan for the students that we see coming. The Elmwood project, by adding a grade, helps the community in terms of having that state funding pay for a part of the project. But either way, Hopkins also needs to be addressed. So adding that third grade to the Elmwood projects helps us with the middle school and high school, but without any project, there's a crunch at every building, and that's what that district planning study showed us.
In terms of, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, in terms of the dollars, see, you got people to come to the microphone, it still didn't help. In terms of the dollars, I would note that recently the school committee updated their 5-year capital plan to actually remove expansions at the high school and middle school to the tune of $70-ish million, because those would not be necessary because of this grade move. So while it doesn't solve the Hopkins problem, that's where you see the money savings, is if we just replace 2-3, we'd have to expand every building. This allows us to take those two big ones off the table.
Yeah, my concern is
Yeah.
that the fact that you're asking for about 980, whatever the number exactly is, plus Hopkins, say half that, whatever that number ends up being. You know, you're talking a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's my concern.
Yes.
Other people ask the questions.
All of this really is in response to enrollment. We just have so many children.
I'm gonna pitch this one over to the other side of the table, the other side of the stage. A question from online: a former employee of the town's public library, part of the process of moving back from a temporary location to the newly renovated building, and that building implemented a geothermal system in one area that simply doesn't function, and that their understanding is that the problem is that Hopkinton's water table is substantial water beneath the building itself, and for that reason it never worked properly, and that area of the building is always very cold. Planning was done during the wrong time of year, during a dry period. All of Hopkinton is very wet. How can you guarantee it will work, as the town has never addressed this problem? How do we know a similar situation will not occur? I know we discussed this as we were analyzing it, but Chris or Dan or
Yeah, I
whoever.
can take that, John. First of all, that's a great question. Whenever you're considering a new technology, it's important to do your due diligence and make sure that it's going to work effectively. We knew about the library, we learned about it throughout the process, and as part of that process, we asked a lot of tough questions of the engineer. And we brought in Dave Del Torio from the town of Hopkinton to speak to how the library works. The library works as an open loop system. And the way that I would explain that would be to look at this slide, but imagine instead of recirculating water, it's going to pull it from the groundwater and redeposit it into the groundwater. That's how the library works. One of the problems with that type of a system is that it can be groundwater dependent, both in terms of the amount of groundwater it can pull from the ground and the quality of that groundwater. For that reason, and the experience that the town had at the library, the engineer proposed a closed loop system. The system that is proposed would be geothermal wells 500 to 600 feet deep, but they would be closed loops. So once the water is in there, the water stays in there. The temperature of the water doesn't get so high that the water evaporates, and it doesn't get so low that the water freezes. Because it's a constant water that stays within a 40 to 90 degree temperature, it doesn't require chemical treatment. And so they have successfully used this approach at other schools in the area, and Vertex and Perkins have successfully used geothermal projects of this type at other schools in the area. So this is a proven system. But we selected that system in part because we knew that the town had experienced issues with geothermal as it's implemented at the library, and so we didn't want to repeat those same mistakes. Okay, from previously submitted questions,
more about traffic. What is the projected traffic increase after school, and can this be included in the broader traffic study? The volumes from Elmwood were absolutely included in the initial traffic study. Currently, 139 cars enter Elmwood School at the drop-off time and 80 exit. At pickup, it's 71 coming in and 138 exiting. These volumes were transferred over to the new location to do the traffic study and adjusted for projected enrollment increases. While we took a conservative approach in looking at this, something in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% of families who have a student at Elmwood also have one at Marathon. So we believe some of that volume would actually not, we wouldn't see a volume increase of 100% because obviously those are the same cars dropping off their kids. And we will obviously continue to include this when we do the additional traffic study. Let's go back to, yeah, that'd be great.
The next question submitted online is the proposed site on Hayden Row was confirmed as having a high water table. Will construction be challenging at that site?
Going over there.
Yes, there is a high water table there, but during construction, they will use dewatering in order to control that. They will also put straw wattles around the whole site and control that water to keep that water on the site during construction. So it shouldn't be an issue long-term or during the construction process at all. Many projects are built that have water that have a high water table and that the water is dealt with on site and does not escape the site during the construction process.
We would add that there's also going to be substantial water retention included in the civil design. So I believe it's
755,000 gallons.
So 755,000 gallons of water retention will be built on site, which will help to control a lot of that, the way in which a lot of that stormwater moves through the site, which doesn't currently exist on the sloped forested site.
One question, let's just build on that one because we got a previously submitted question about that water storage and what happens with the water storage that's captured in the tank.
There are, that water storage is actually retention. It will hold the water and it will slowly let it back out onto the site. And there are 5 locations. One is on the main road coming in. There's 2 in the back. One in the back feeds a outside retention pond, and then there are 2 in the front. So what it does is it captures all that 750,000 plus gallons, and it slowly puts it back into the environment over time, so that there's not a rush of water, which is I think of what the community is seeing, who live near there now under certain circumstances.
Any others in the room? Okay, we'll keep going.
I want to ask more question on the enrollment, right? I know we use Dr. Wegmans for mostly budgeting purposes, and we've been running relatively close to what they have, and he does pre-K through 12. And the MSBA doesn't care about pre-K, so that doesn't show up in the numbers. So when you try and compare the numbers back and forth, it becomes kind of difficult. But the big thing is that, so one question I have is in the one of the October school committee meetings, we said that we had 4,200 students, 4,201. Was that including pre-K or was that including K to 12? Just trying to compare it against the MSBA numbers.
Oops, I'm sorry. Yes, it did include pre-K. And pre-K is sort of hard to pin down a little bit because it's a special education program, and what we do is we invite in typical peers, and there has to be a particular balance along that. So last year we may have had about 110, 115 kids. Sometimes we start with 80 and the program grows over time. But to answer your question, yes, they were there, and it might have been at about 90 at that point in time.
Okay. So I guess the question then is if I look at the Wegman numbers and I look at the MSBA numbers, just K to 12, that, in the 9 years that they're out there, because I don't see Wegman for the last set for 32, is that there's about 1,000 kid difference, pupil difference at the end. And my concern is we're starting to see things go down as far as building and home sales and so forth. And so maybe the bubble that we had is leveled off. And so the question is, if we build this school, what happens if we have no students? And I don't mean no students, don't get me wrong, there'll be students. But let's just say there's not enough to say put in the 5th grade, as an example, and another full grade in. What do we get? Does that hurt us on the MSBA money? Like, if we build the school for, I don't know, was it 1,200 or something like that? And only we get 900, do we get dinged and have to give money back, or do they automatically give us the money? It's ours to keep?
So, yeah, so the enrollment, and actually Jeff could probably speak, but the enrollment agreement that occurs based on the MSBA projections, and I say enrollment agreement because they sort of tell us what the enrollment is locked in. So regardless of how many students we have the day it opens, this full reimbursement that they have agreed to is ours. We will not owe any money back.
So we don't owe any money, and if we have extra space,
Nope.
we could do other things with it. Like I
Nope.
said,
Well,
yeah. Put 5 in there if that's how it worked out, so forth.
Yeah. Anything?
Yeah, no, that's correct. The deal is about the enrollment that's already set in motion, and so there's no take back if the students don't show up at a later date.
Okay.
There is an online question that's very similar, so we'll just ask it aloud. The MSBA enrollment projections were used to size this school and determine space needs at the other schools. The superintendent recently reported our enrollment of 4,201 students. MSBA has K-12 enrollment of 4,282 students through the end of fiscal year 24. Note this figure does not include pre-K. Is our fiscal year 24 enrollment running below the MSBA K-12 projections, and if so, by how much?
So if the enrollment that the MSBA is predicting is 4,282, and we're currently at 4,201, I understand what you're saying is that we should subtract the 90 students from pre-K out of the 4,200, which would put us at 4,110. So the short answer to that question is, yes, we are running under the MSBA prediction at this point in time. One thing we should also remember is that kids continue to join our schools throughout the year, and so when a demographer gives us a number, we typically look at that as the number that we would arrive at by June of the end of that school year. So I can't tell you that I think we're getting 200 students in the Hopkinton Public Schools before June of 2024, but I can certainly tell you that there will be more at the end of the school year than there are today.
We had another question. Net of reimbursement, the budgeted cost of project is 91 million prior to bonding interest expense over 25 to 30 years. What is the total cost? That is the principal and interest cost of this project.
So you're right, the 91 is just the total cost. It's not the full borrowing cost, principal and interest. And I meant to tell you to put a pin in this one because I'm online right now trying to reach out to get that number. So I know it was calculated by the town's appropriation committee and finance director. I just don't have it handy. So if for some reason we can't get it.
I'm going to do that.
We need to mute someone.
Yep, and so, so we'll try to get that by the end of this session, but if not, we will get that number out. Worth noting that I think all of these borrowing numbers are projected on what the bank tells us they think that the rates are going to be when we borrow. We've used a pretty conservative rate rate that's significantly higher than we've been able to borrow from previous projects. So the hope is that the borrowing environment will be more favorable when we get there, but that's what these projections are based on. So when you look at tax impact, that's sort of projecting out a little bit based on what we think and know about the economic conditions. And when I say we, definitely not me, but some people who are smarter about this.
John, I think a good point to raise at that time would also be an understanding of how the MSBA reimbursed the town. While the ask at town meeting is going to be 157-ish, because it already includes the 1 million that was approved prior for the feasibility study that is now concluding. Over the course of the project, the MSBA reimburses the town up to 95%. So the town will be receiving that reimbursement grant over the course of the job. So the town does not go out the day after town meeting and borrow $158 million. The town borrows as the need is incurred over the course of construction through 2028 and has the ability to offset that as they receive reimbursements from the MSBA over that period of time.
Thanks, Chris. And jumping ahead, a question that I know is on there was about the rebates. And the question came in, will the rebates be used to pay down the bond on the school? The rebates actually will be used to reduce the amount that the town has to borrow. So that was guidance that came from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, that we can actually use those rebates to reduce the amount we have to borrow so that we never incur any interest on that money. So it will actually be even more favorable than using it to directly pay down the loan. A couple of questions that came in that were all sort of related to a broader traffic study. So the question about if the lights could be changed timing-wise at up near Hopkinton Lumber or Chestnut Street to mitigate traffic before it gets to the congested area, and would the committee consider a broader traffic study? Ultimately, the traffic study we're doing that we can pay for as part of this project is limited because of the elementary school building committee's charter and project. So we can't really do a broader traffic study. That would be something that would need to be initiated from the town level. So if people are interested in that, in getting at some of more of the root causes of the traffic on Hayden Row or other areas of town, that I would suggest you talk to the select board and the town manager to get that going. But that's not something that we could fit in under the project for this elementary school.
The 952 tax increase peak in 2028 is just the cost associated with the new school. Is that correct? Can we see the total tax increase year over year, including projects we're still paying for from previously approved projects and upcoming Hopkins improvements?
I don't think we have that handy, but I believe that was included in the recently issued appropriation committee report. So I think people can find that on the town website through the appropriation committee, but I don't think we have that information available with us tonight.
We also just had a comment that on the Zoom call, it sounds like maybe one of the questions, the response could not be heard by the audience speaker. So I think they would like one question re-answered, if that would be okay.
Do we know what the question is?
Yes, I believe so. It was Barry's first question. And I believe, John, if you could just redirect again that the calculated by the town and finance director, the information regarding the total cost of the project?
Yeah, the total cost. So we don't have, I know it exists. I don't have it handy. We're trying to run it down right now. In fact, okay. So we're trying to run down what that total cost is of the borrowing. So the 91 plus whatever interest would be. I know that that was included in the calculation the appropriation committee did. I just don't have it. So we've got some texts out. If we can get it tonight, we'll answer it in the room. If we can't, we'll get it out through other channels.
Isn't that included in the 952?
So it is included, sorry, the 952 includes, that is a principal and interest payment. Sorry, that is correct.
And that's the highest year, which is
That's the
first year.
highest year. But I think the question was, what is, like, if you add the total interest to the 91, what is that number? And that's what we don't have. But yes, the 952 is a principal and interest payment, just like when you're paying your mortgage. So it includes both of those. Questions on lighting. So what is the potential light pollution impact to the local neighborhood from the high levels of the building and the parking lot lights?
I think as part of the overall design and the sustainability goals, we do not have lights trespass, so we will not have foot candles leaving the site, much like the stormwater.
The planning board has pretty specific standards as far as lighting it. None of it could leave the site. When we go through the planning board process, that'll be determined.
That's right. And as part of that planning process, we even get down to the hours of operation and the cutoffs and the dark sky compliant lights. So that'll all flow through the planning board process.
Question about the Blueberry Lane neighborhood. I guess I look taller. Will it be affected by the school building? Based on the location of Blueberry Lane, the area between the proposed building and Blueberry Lane being heavily wooded, the project team does not think that there will be any disturbance to Blueberry Lane as part of this project. Another question: Will the new facility plan to be used during off-school hours, nights, weekends, summers? There's no facility plan developed at this point and stage of the project. Obviously, we haven't gotten approval to build the project yet, but I would expect that it would have similar uses like the gym for Hopkinton basketball, similar to the way the other elementary schools are used, and probably summer programs potentially as well. Anything else?
There aren't any questions in the chat or Q&A function. Are there any others in the room that would like to come to the mic?
Evening. I have a little of a speech delay right now. So I just wanted to talk about the traffic a little bit on Hayden Row, and then the speed. John, you had mentioned that the committee doesn't have the purview to consider changing the limit, but you asked us to try to talk to the town. We would like some guidance on how we can do that, because I know there are some programs that we maybe can through the state that maybe we can help limit the speed down to maybe 25. So if that's on us, how do we do that? And can you help us do that? Because right now the traffic in that corridor is brutal, really. And so if you guys can champion it, if you can, if you can do that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely can get you information about some of those, kind of what those options are. I can also tell you that our committee took a vote and as a result communicated to the town manager that we think that should be considered. And the town manager's office and the select board are well aware of their options based on the conversation that I had with them. But that's absolutely something that we can get out to you in the next, I'll get it to you in the next couple of days, what some of the procedural things are. But when I last spoke to the town manager, that is very much in the purview of the select board to make that change. All right, I've got some more. Location. So a question about other options. Mike reviewed a bit about what the other options were. One specific question about South Street locations that I think Mike effectively answered in his section. Another one about what other locations were considered. And actually, I think this was covered as well with Mike showing the table for the multitude of over 40 plus sites. And the breakdown of how we assess those. Anything to add?
All the sites we looked at, there was about 50 of them. One of them, and again, these are sites where it was 7 acres. For example, my son owns 25 acres up of Spring Street. But to put a school on Spring Street, which has no sidewalks and is at the very fringe of the edge of the town, wouldn't be economically possible. So there was a lot of the sites that fell into those categories. Other sites that didn't have infrastructure that would support a school, didn't have sewage, didn't have gas, didn't have enough power, those were eliminated as well, because the school, just by virtue of being a school, requires all those things. We tried to keep out of the fringes of Hopkinton, which is pretty much all we have in Hopkinton is fringes, and putting the school out off of Clinton Street. There was a piece of property out there. Again, it was hard to negotiate, and those roads, if you thought Hayden Row had a lot of traffic, if you took that traffic and put it on Clinton Street, it would be dead stopped. So we eliminated those. We looked seriously at Elmwood. Elmwood, we looked at doing an addition or tearing the school down and building a new school on the site, but there wasn't enough land to support the parking and the ball fields. So we actually went to 2 neighbors and said, what do you think about selling your property to the town so we could have a big enough area? And of course, neither one of them were interested in selling their property. Like I say, the West Nursery one looked really good on paper. And at the end, the lady just didn't want to sell it. And it was a tough lot. It was really sloped. So it didn't work out. But we did. We looked at a lot of them. We eliminated out of just immediately, almost like the College Rock site. There was a big parcel up there. There was a parcel down at the bottom of West Main Street, just before you get to Whalen Road. There was a 20-acre site in there, but it was extremely wet because all the water that comes off the top of the hill goes down there, as you probably know. And they're currently in negotiation to put a subdivision in there. I don't know how that's going to work. But we did look at, we spent a lot of time looking at a lot of sites. But
There's one off of near Lumber and Granite,
yep.
next to the Milford Gun Range.
Yep.
That was not bad.
Yeah. Again,
Moved everywhere.
it was like, the roads are too small to support bus traffic. None of them had sidewalks. Those are like the basic parameters that we needed to get kids to move around safely. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time looking at a lot of sites. Thank you.
We also, just because I know it's come up a lot, we looked at a couple of the vacant buildings that are in town, and those presented a number of challenges. The structural grid that those buildings are built to doesn't really support an educational use well. And many of those buildings, as many in town know, have conservation restrictions either adjacent to them or wetlands restrictions adjacent to them, which limits their use. And in all of those situations, the town does not own those properties. So procuring those properties was a significant cost that would factor into selecting any of those in alternative to the selected site.
This would be the last bit, but we also looked at the former Liberty Mutual site. But the building wasn't adequate to support the school, so it had to be torn down and build a new school. But again, it had none of the infrastructure you needed to get kids there and get kids out. That's about it.
Not that any of us in early November want to be talking about snow, but we do have a question with regards to snow. When and if snow is on the access road from the Marathon School to the Elmwood School, is the snow going to end up melting and flooding properties? What measures are going to be taken to prevent this? I know that this is going to be, again, part of that planning board and permitting process, but I know that there are some already designed-in concepts around the snow. So Dan, Bob, whoever.
Currently, at the end of schematic design, the concept would be to plow that road to the parking area, which is it's a pervious lot, so it actually is a gravel lot, and that would allow water to infiltrate into it. At that lot, there is a 60,000 gallon infiltration system, so that would capture most of that water again and retain it, and then slowly meet that out. So any of the snow falling on the site is the same now as it will be when the building's built. The idea is that there'd be a big pile there, but there is a plan to store that, and there is a plan to have that close enough to a retention basin so that it does not just melt and go into off the property.
Another question was submitted online. It reads, I attended the Permanent Building Committee's meeting reviewing potential uses of unused school buildings. The various alternatives will also increase taxes by varying degrees if approved. Where can we see the overall potential tax increases based on all of these school-related projects?
So the question is about the Permanent Building Committee had a forum on their options, potential options for reuse of several town buildings, including Elmwood and Center, and the total tax impact. The Permanent Building Committee hasn't priced any of these yet, so in terms of what the options are and what the tax impact would be, they're effectively at the stage that we were, I would say, back in site selection for this project, which is that they're assessing options and they're testing them with the public. So in terms of what the tax impact would be, excuse me, for any retrofitting that would happen for reuse of those buildings, that's not something that I think anybody has contemplated because they haven't even estimated the costs of those. Again, in terms of the existing projects that are on the tax bill right now and are coming on, that is all included in the Appropriation Committee report. All right, so I've got 4 on here that are related to the general school questions, and if there are no more in the room or online after these, then I guess we'll wrap it up. But, sorry.
I got one more on the wetlands.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna read this one. Hopefully this will go okay. Is the committee aware of the runoff project currently going on EMC Park? Apparently, there a issue with the retention basins that have not been maintained, and a home on Hazel Road was affected. Are you guys concerned about the wetlands in the EMC part of the area?
As a former conservation member, I'm concerned about all the wetlands. But the school project is the school project. I understand the EMC park down at the lower end where the skate park used to be and the new skate park is going to be, they're addressing that drainage. That water does run down towards Blueberry from EMC Park. But no, it's not part of the school project.
No, I understand that. I get that, but it seems like it's nearby that those basins are failing, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Parks and Recs is looking at that. That's their bailiwick. And between the DPW and Parks and Recs, they'll be addressing that question. It's entirely separate from the school issue.
Question, this is probably for Dr. Kavanaugh. What is the metric of success for this new facility? Certainly, if there's a need to spend over $150 million, there must be some measure to understand the effectiveness once it's complete.
So as we look today at Elmwood and Hopkins, both of those schools are exceedingly overcrowded. I used to think that Elmwood was probably the more overcrowded, but currently we have 16 fifth grade classrooms and 14 fourth grade classrooms at Hopkins, and I think that's probably the more overcrowded school now. So I would say one metric of success is that this new building should accommodate all of the students comfortably in grades 2, 3, and 4. And I think that it should also be able to offer 21st century programmatic layouts for our kids, so that what we need in terms of ESOL, which we didn't have when we built, schools like Hopkins even 20 years ago. And I think early on we may have had 5 or 6 or 7 kids who were ESOL students, and it was easy to absorb them and find a space for their education. But when you have 250 students who are ESOL students, it makes it more challenging to find spaces for their education. So ESOL, special education, other kinds of programs like science and technology and engineering, all of those things that are evolving with our population and over time, those things to me will be a metric of success. I also sort of have this belief that every child should reach their fullest potential, and that's different for every student. And so we want to make sure that kids are getting academically what they need, social, emotionally, and behaviorally what they need, and that will be a metric for success. Those things may be harder to measure by traditional metrics, but as our kids move through our school system, we have BAS data, STAR data, QRI data, MCAS data, local assessments, traditional report cards. All of those things tell us how our kids are doing. And typically now, by those metrics, our kids are doing exceedingly well, and I'm hoping to maintain that excellence when we move into the new building, if we move into the new building.
Well, hang on, actually, before you do, I got an answer. See, this is what, I got an answer to the total cost. So if you include the interest borrowed over 30 years, and again, this is an estimate based on a 4.25% interest rate borrowing over 30 years. The reality is we don't know, that number could very well be lower by the time we borrow. Over the life of the loan, they'll refinance every single time they have an opportunity to refinance. So I'm giving all of those caveats when, realizing that this number probably doesn't actually bear any comparison to what will actually be the total number. But if you project out, it's about $154 million if you have principal and interest. And again, this is true of any of the capital projects you vote for at town meeting. So the price that you're given is the price of the building. We borrow, that's the way we pay for most of our capital, and we pay the interest over time. Again, the similar way you would paying your mortgage.
The next question is, the town has 203 parcels of land that it owns in town. The value of these are estimated at $146 million. Are there town assets that can be liquidated to offset the tax burden on residents?
I'm gonna right off the bat just say this is absolutely way outside of anything that the elementary school building committee can answer. That is a great question for the town manager, for the select board, in terms of if there are opportunities to raise revenue by selling existing parcels in town, but we haven't spent that is not part of our charter. We haven't spent any time on looking at that. It's definitely apart from our mission. Okay, so I lied about the 4 questions because a couple of them we already answered, like what will happen to the existing Elmwood School. 2 questions that I'll smush together around incremental operating costs of the facility. We know that the questions are really around what would be the additional costs, specifically around people that would be related to the new school. So Dr. Kavanaugh, Mrs. Rothermick, I'd look to you to that.
Sure. We've looked at those numbers, and if we are using the 1,195 students as our estimate, we would need 1 additional assistant principal. And, we say right now that Elmwood has only 1, but we have to remember that across grades 2 through 8, we currently have 4. So we would be adding, 1 for each building, so to speak, if we pulled 1 with us. If that's making sense. So the answer to the assistant principal would be 1. We would not need an additional school adjustment counselor. We have those in place. When we look at related arts teachers, we would need about 0.3 additional FTEs in each one of those. So 0.3 art, 0.3 music, 0.3 wellness, so to speak. Classroom teachers are interesting. Currently, we have 14 grade 4 teachers or classrooms, 15 in grade 3, and 14 in grade 2. So the way this school is being designed and the way we are looking at projecting out enrollment, we anticipate having 18 classrooms at each one of those grade levels. So essentially, we would add these positions as students enroll. And what you need to remember is these positions don't really have to do with the new physical plant. They have to do with the numbers of students in front of us all the time. So if we were to reach the numbers in the MSBA chart immediately you would have to add 4 fourth grade classrooms, 3 third grade classrooms, and 4 second grade classrooms. If that happens over time, incrementally, we would add those positions until we got to a place where we reached the 1195 and we had those positions in place. Typically, that's how it works. I think when I first came to Hopkinton, we had about 12 classrooms at each grade level. And when we think about now having 16 fifth grade classrooms, that's really, I think, an illustration of the growth. We would anticipate having somewhere around 35 additional special education students, and that would require us to have 3 additional special education FTEs. In terms of cafeteria staff, we would need to add cafeteria staff, but they would not appear in the operating budget because that's a self-sustaining program paid for out of the revolving account. And with 175,000 square feet, we would need an increase of 2 custodians.
Dr. Kavanaugh, a question was just added online, and they would like you to clarify. Did you say earlier that there would need to be 3 assistant principals and 3 adjustment counselors? Could you expand?
Yes, that is what I said. So if you think about the way the assistant principals are laid out, right now there are 2 grade levels at Elmwood with 1 assistant principal, 2 grade levels at Marathon, and I guess this is a spoiler alert that we'll be asking for another one this year at Hopkins School. At Hopkins School, because it really is just overwhelming to have 30 classrooms and to have 1 assistant principal for all of those students. So we will be asking for 1 in the FY25 budget. So there will be 2 at Hopkins, and then there are currently 2 at the middle school. So if the middle school becomes essentially a 2-grade school, they could stay there. Hopkins would have 2 there, and we would need to add, somehow we would be adding these over time, so that when you opened the door of that school, you wouldn't need 2, you would probably only need 1, is what we're trying to say. So that's the way we've been thinking about it, is that we've been adding these before we even open the doors of this school. The school adjustment counselors, we typically do have 2 in each one of those schools now. So if you pull out grade 4, you'd pull their school adjustment counselor with them, so you wouldn't need 1.
Any more questions? This room got exhausted faster than last week. Oh, see, I shouldn't have said anything. That's on me.
The question that's submitted says, is there any routine communication between the town planning committees and the school committee with respect to town development and the impact on school enrollment? Just thinking about long-term growth.
So, again, when we did the district planning study, that was encompassing the buildings that we have, but we also, with our enrollment projections, we engage with all different departments of the town, so we understand not only what is here today, but what is the potential looking forward, so we can understand enrollment moving forward. There is a representative of the school committee that attends, is the liaison for the planning board, so we do, the committee does stay engaged with what is going on.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I would remind everyone that this Monday, November 13th at 7 p.m. in the middle school auditorium is town meeting, where we will be voting on not only the Elmwood School Project, but there are 3 other articles on the warrant as well. And then the town ballot solely for the Elmwood School Project will be on November 28th. Thank you all for coming out tonight and or joining by Zoom, and I hope to see you all on Monday.